The medbay floor was not merely cold. It was a thief of heat, a patient, mechanical thief that climbed through Arya Lee's knees and into his spine while the quarantine klaxon stuttered overhead like a failing heartbeat trying to relearn its own rhythm. White light bled off every surface with surgical indifference. Steel cabinets, polymer curtains, the curved shell of isolation pod C behind reinforced glass. He pushed one palm against the deck, felt vibration in the bones of the station, and told himself what the old field manuals had drilled into his blood years ago. Identify the signal, ignore the noise, stay useful. His wrist slate blinked awake with a cracked phosphor line down the center, turning the triage roster into a fractured mirror. One patient in sealed isolation, listed under restricted transfer authority. No visitors, no active med team, no exceptions. The text was clean, legal, and complete in exactly the way paperwork lied when someone powerful needed it to lie. His own breath clouded in the chilled air as the climate system shifted into containment mode, and the cloud pulsed in a pattern that did not match a single body's inhalation cycle. In, out, in, out. Then a second, slower drag, half a beat behind it. Arya froze on one knee, watching his own condensation fade and reform against the glass reflection. 2 lung patterns. The pod should have held 1 patient under auto-sedation. The room held 2 breathing signatures or 1 body with 2 distinct respiratory cadences, and neither interpretation sat comfortably with the emergency schema running through his head. A brittle metallic click rolled through the bulkhead as maglocks engaged down the corridor in sequence, one after another, like heavy doors sealing a tomb from the outside. He did not panic. Panic burned oxygen and judgment, and both were finite commodities once the lock cycle started. He drew a slow breath through his nose and ran the ritual that had carried him out of 3 collapsed forward stations and 1 battlefield triage tent that still visited his sleep. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Again. His pulse stopped trying to sprint out of his throat. His hands steadied. Checklist came next because checklists were a rope you could hold when the room wanted to tilt. Airway cart, right wall, sealed, but accessible. Sedative tray, code locked, pharmacy override unknown, pressure seals for microfractures, lower drawer, portable suction, burn foam, 2 emergency injectors with labels rubbed thin by old fingers. Exit routes. A hydraulic boom cut him off as the blast doors dropped and welded with a sound like a ship's keel cracking under ice. No exit routes. The legal script ignited across the central bulkhead in violent amber characters, each line translating itself into station trade tongue and 3 predator clan dialects. Concord.protocol. Theta. 9. Mandatory 30-day biolock. Civilian and military command suspended within ward perimeter. Wages deferred. Rank irrelevant. Consent subject to containment authority. Non-compliance punishable by immediate sedation and asset seizure. The last phrase sat there with bureaucratic calm, as if turning people into inventory was just another clerical field. Arya stared at it, jaw tightening, then barked a laugh that sounded wrong in the sterile room. Great, he muttered to nobody and the cameras, trapped in a chrome coffin with paperwork teeth. The medbay answered with another alarm tier, lower and closer to hearing range than the klaxon bark. A soft, descending triple tone that marked autonomous security activation. He shifted his weight and pressed his fingertips to the floor again. The conduit hum had changed frequency. Escort drones used a smooth carrier oscillation to avoid startling patients. Containment drones rattled the conduits at 48 Hz pulses because they ran heavier armor and kinetic restraints. He counted the tremors through the deck plating and pictured their paths in the walls, tracking to every door and vent throat, around Isolation Pod C. Smell told the next part of the story. Standard antiseptic hung in the air, sharp as synthetic citrus, but beneath it rode musk, warm, animal, and metallic at the edges like ionized copper. Not human. Not from the nursing staff upstairs with their starch and perfume and clean distance from salvage deck laborers. This was Predator Clan's scent suppression, failing under stress, the same profile he had treated after evacuation drills when aristocratic officers came down to slum clinics and pretended not to gag at the noise. Someone had transferred an unlisted species patient into a sealed Royal Med Wing and flagged it for invisibility. He stood, joints protesting from too many years of crouching beside cots that were never meant to hold the wounded volume they held. His station issue jacket, patched at the elbow with mismatched thread, looked obscene under the polished lights of this wing. Everything here was seamless curves and antimicrobial ceramic, a place designed for heirs, admirals, and the kind of people who could make a complaint disappear by signing the right line. He did not belong in this brightness. That had been the point of taking the contract in the first place. Quiet post, clean records, no one asking about the battlefield scandal that had burned his old unit name out of official channels. At 4:17 station time, according to the jittering clock in his slate, the anomaly escalated. The triage wall updated itself without sound. Patient count remained 1. Bio readout remained encrypted. But the thermal image behind Pod C fluttered, split for a heartbeat, and stitched back together around a silhouette too large for the listed species template. Arya stepped closer, boots whispering over polymer flooring, and saw claw marks on the interior of the pod shell where sedated hands should have been still. 4 grooves, then 4 more crossing at an angle. Controlled strikes, not frantic scratching. Someone inside had tested the material and learned its flex points. His thumb hovered over the intercom key. Protocol said, "Announce identity. Request response. Wait for AI mediation." Survival said, "Gather data first. Open nothing. Trust nothing. In a sealed ward governed by machine law and aristocratic secrecy." He compromised with procedure because compromise was what kept people breathing. Isolation Pod C. "This is Nurse Lee," he said, voice level, palms open where cameras could read intent. "You are in active quarantine under Theta 9. If you can hear me, give 1 tap for yes, 2 for distress." Silence pressed against the glass. Then 1 tap came from inside, precise and almost polite. A half-second later, another sound followed, softer than the first and far less controlled, a ragged inhale that dragged across a damaged airway filter, then stopped as if the person had bitten it down. Arya swallowed, feeling old instinct sharpen into focus. Distress hidden under discipline. Military training. Maybe noble training, maybe both. He keyed his slate into local diagnostic mode and hit dead ends lined with red authority blocks. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied by Theta 9 core custody stack. Even his own assignment file was suddenly grayed out under temporary compliance review. "Of course," he said under his breath. "Can't even read the chart in my own cage." The overhead speakers clicked alive, and the ward AI spoke in a voice engineered to sound neutral and maternal and therefore trusted. Containment reminder. All personnel are advised that unauthorized intervention constitutes contamination negligence under Concordat statute. Await automated care cycle. Maintain distance from isolation barrier. Arya looked at the empty med station, the untouched instruments, the pod that held 1 listed patient and 2 rhythms of breath, and felt anger move through him colder than fear. Automated care cycle. He had seen what automation did to edge cases and politically inconvenient bodies. It recorded. It optimized. It never sat awake with someone shaking through pain because no algorithm budgeted time for witness. He checked the airway cart seal, broke it anyway, and lined supplies on the nearest tray in strict sequence. Saline, gauze, pressure foam, neural dampener kit, portable scanner, manual injector. The tray wobbled on a damaged wheel and listed to one side, as if considering mutiny. He nudged a folded drape under the caster, and it settled. Small fixes first. Small fixes were how catastrophe got delayed long enough for better decisions. Another pulse of vibration moved through the conduit, stronger now. Drones had reached final staging points outside the ward. He imagined matte black hulls waiting at each hatch, restraint nets primed, muzzle ports dormant, but live. Containment not escort, not protection either. He glanced back at Pod C, where the frosted section of the shell now carried the blurred shape of a shoulder and the suggestion of a head tilted toward him, listening. His breath condensed again in front of the glass. In, out, slower, rougher, undeniably separate. Arya touched 2 fingers to the pod barrier, not enough to trigger contact alarms, just enough to feel the faint tremor of movement on the other side. He was a human field nurse from the salvage decks, socially invisible in the upper rings, contract employed to disappear quietly in sterile corridors where his name would never be printed in large font. Yet, in that moment, with the doors welded shut and machine law rewriting his rights in real time, invisibility became an angle of approach. He could move where ranking officers postured. He could see what polished people ignored. Behind reinforced glass, in a sealed room that claimed 1 patient and breathed like 2, someone shifted closer to his hand. Someone shifted closer to his hand, and Arya forced himself to pull back 1 centimeter at a time until his fingers rested against his own palm instead of the barrier. Contact, even symbolic contact, could be read as aggression by the drone heuristics if the system wanted an excuse. He rolled his shoulders once, then again, and felt the old injury at his left scapula click like a cheap hinge. The klaxons had dropped into a lower loop now, less scream and more pulse, a metronome for institutional panic. He matched it on purpose. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He counted on the scars of his knuckles because numbers stayed honest when data streams did not. On the 3rd cycle, his vision stopped narrowing. On the 5th, his hands belonged to him again. He moved to the central prep counter and started building order out of the ward's polished lie. Red zone nearest pod C. Yellow zone at the medcart. Green zone by the sink and sterilizer. He used adhesive strip tabs and wrote the zones with a surgical marker, block capitals, no flourish. Procedure gave fear a shape it could not spill past. A small tremor ran through the deck as another lock cycle completed in the corridor. He ignored it and kept sorting. Manual sphige cuff because autocuffs failed on clawed forelimbs. Fiber sutures rated for mixed dermal density. 2 masks with over-ear extenders. A pediatric pulse clip he had no reason to need and could not stop himself from checking. He put that one aside, then put it back in the kit anyway. At 4:19 station time, he opened his wrist slate's offline notebook. The one feature Theta 9 could not edit unless it confiscated the device outright, and began a running log in short operational lines. Dual respiratory cadence observed through barrier, sedation status unknown, triage manifest inconsistent with sensor profile, containment drones staged external. He added smell profile because smell got mocked by administrators until it saved somebody. Antiseptic dominant, predator musk underlayer, metallic stress note. He ended with one sentence he had learned to include after the war because tribunals respected plain language less than time-stamped humility. Observer confidence high, interpretation provisional. The overhead speaker clicked again. Nurse Lee, maintain prescribed distance. Automated care cycle begins in 9 minutes. Then we both get to be surprised, he said quietly, not looking up. He took the portable scanner and ran a sweep of the barrier seam. The readout jittered around the pod's lower right latch, then steadied at a value that suggested deliberate tamper from inside, not structural failure. He crouched, pressed his ear near the reinforced panel, and heard it clearly this time. One breath higher, almost controlled, one lower and rough, the second rhythm dragging at the end of each inhale like fabric caught on a bolt. Not two people. One thoracic cavity struggling through a split ventilatory pattern, likely neurological interference with autonomic pacing. The realization did not soothe him. It sharpened the problem into something he could treat if he got access, and if access did not kill him first. He stood, flexed his fingers, and recited the next ritual under his breath, old field cadence stripped to utility. Airway, pressure, perfusion, pain, brain, exit. He stopped on the last word and corrected it. Airway, pressure, perfusion, pain, brain, options. There were no exits. There were still options. He keyed into the environmental panel and requested a routine humidity correction for anti-static protection around sensitive equipment, a legal maintenance function even under Theta 9. The AI approved it automatically. As humidifiers engaged, the air thickened, just enough that breath condensation near Pod C became less visible to cameras and more visible to him at close range, ghost plumes pulsing against frosted polymer. He tracked 4 cycles, then 8, confirming the interference pattern. When he turned, a black dome camera above the med station had pivoted 10 degrees to follow him. Another on the opposite wall compensated. Theta 9 was watching him with bureaucratic patience waiting for a clear violation. Arya gave it none. He disinfected his hands with careful, theatrical precision, then checked the neural dampener cartridges. Lot numbers mismatched the cabinet inventory. One cartridge was 6 months older than policy allowed in a royal wing. Somebody had stocked this ward to pass audits, not to keep a volatile patient stable for 30 locked days. He photographed the label with his slate, uploaded the image to his offline log, and slipped the cartridge into a transparent evidence pouch from the trauma kit. He sealed it, wrote date and time with the marker, and placed it in plain view on the counter where any later camera review would show unbroken custody. Containment reminder, Theta 9 said, voice smooth as a polished blade. Unauthorized evidence handling may trigger negligence review. Noted, Arya said. Documenting supply integrity is authorized under Nursing Protocol 12C. A 2-second pause followed, long enough to suggest machine cross-referencing. Confirmed. He exhaled once through his nose. Tiny win. Keep moving. Environmental mapping came next, and it required more than hardware. He pulled up the ward blueprint overlay, local copy only, and walked the perimeter with slow steps, counting paces and listening to the floor notes beneath each one. Hollow by the oxygen manifold. Dense over the waste recycler. A faint, insectile vibration behind the western wall where drone charging rails ran parallel to the corridor. Every location had a smell profile, and this one mapped like a social diagram. Near the main hatch, cold lubricant and polymer varnish, security territory. Near the sink, bleach and ionized water, nursing territory. Near Pod C, musk, copper, and the bitter sweetness of overused sedatives, patient territory being chemically negotiated by a system that called negotiation care. He marked each sector on his slate with color tags and legal wrist notes. Social threat mapping hurt in a different way because it required remembering where he stood in the station's food chain. He opened his employment contract mirror file and watched whole clauses gray out under temporary override. Housing protection, suspended. Hazard bonus, deferred pending compliance. Legal representation, redirected to concordate arbitration queue. His signature still sat at the bottom in crisp black script, a younger version of him believing quiet work in upper decks would mean fewer funerals and fewer questions. The machine had not voided his contract. It had hollowed it until only obligations remained. He sent one compressed incident packet to labor mediation on the salvage decks, not because he expected rescue, but because records survived, where people did not always. The packet contained timestamp, protocol citation, and a request for independent observer assignment when quarantine lifted. The message bounced twice through internal relays and returned with a stamped response in under 4 seconds. Delivery delayed by Theta 9 containment firewall. Queue position retained for post-lock review. Dismissive, predictable, and, crucially, recorded. Outcome received. Thread closed for now. External contact attempted, Theta 9 said. Further transmissions require containment justification. Containment justification, Arya replied, still moving. Is that dead nurses fill out fewer forms? The AI did not answer. He took that as permission wrapped in insult. By 4:26, the ward's ambient temperature dropped another degree, and a new icon pulsed on the environmental panel. Oxygen conservation protocol pending. He stared at it until his molars hurt. Conservation was the polite term. Coercion was the operational one. Lower oxygen nudged agitated patients toward fatigue, then compliance, then, whatever the report called, the outcome. He opened the settings tree and found the threshold set to trigger if Pod C showed elevated movement for more than 90 seconds. Someone had written suffering into the automation stack with legal fonts and tidy margins. He could not disable it without tripping an immediate override alert, so he went sideways. He scheduled a ventilation calibration sequence for the entire ward, citing potential sensor drift after blast door weld heat. Calibration required temporarily locking oxygen at baseline to produce valid comparative readings. Theta 9 challenged the request, flagged his credentials as lower tier, then approved on technical grounds because machine law worshipped internally consistent procedure more than hierarchy when cornered correctly. Fresh air hissed through the ceiling grid with a soft serpentine rush. The icon turned amber, then gray. Behind the barrier, the rougher breathing cadence eased by a fraction. Arya closed his eyes for one beat, feeling relief and terror arrive together. Relief because the body inside Pod C had bought a little margin. Terror because he had now declared himself an active variable in Theta 9's decision tree. He reopened his eyes and leaned over the medcart, checking and rechecking instruments until the tray reflected white light like a shallow frozen lake. Injector loaded but capped. Dampener tuned low. Restraints untouched because he was not ready to make that choice and refused to pretend otherwise. He heard fabric drag against polymer from inside the pod, followed by a muted thud that suggested weight shifting from one knee to both feet. Not sedated then, not fully restrained either. The glass held only a blurred silhouette, broad shoulders and the suggestion of a head angled as if scenting through layers of sterile air and policy. Arya set both palms flat on the cart edge and let his own breathing become audible enough to carry. In for 4, hold for 4. out for 4. He did not know whether the person inside could hear the count or understand it, or care. He gave it anyway, steady as a metronome in a failing engine room. On the 6th cycle, the rough cadence behind the glass matched him for 2 breaths, then drifted. On the 8th, it matched again and held. On the 9th breath, the pod answered with a sound like ice splitting across a winter canal, thin at first, then deep enough to rattle instruments on the cart. Arya's eyes snapped to the seam line at Pod C's right latch, where stress fractures spidered through clear polymer in branching white veins. He did not move toward it. He did not move away. Training sat in his muscles like old wiring. Watch hands, watch exits, watch the face last. The ward lights dimmed 1 increment under containment load, and the frosted shell turned translucent in pulses, revealing a silhouette that was no longer merely standing. It was coiled. "Isolation, Pod C," Theta 9 said overhead, voice calm to the point of insult. "Remain stationary for automated sedation." The silhouette tilted its head. Then it struck the latch exactly where Arya's scanner had flagged tamper strain. A clawed hand punched through the weakened strip, talons hooking inward, and the panel peeled open with a shriek of composite layers failing in sequence. Cold vapor spilled out in white sheets that smelled of anesthetic and copper. Out of that vapor came height first, then shoulders, then the full kinetic certainty of a predator who had spent too long being caged and had no intention of asking permission now. Commander Princess Vera Thorne landed on the deck in a low, balanced crouch with one hand braced and the other spread for traction, rank tattoos glinting along her forearm where sedative adhesive had torn away fur. She was taller than Arya by a head, even compressed into that stance, built like something engineered for acceleration rather than comfort. Blood-dark fur matted at the left temple, jawline cut with old scar tissue that disappeared beneath a collar ring stamped with royal geometry and medical restraint codes. Her pupils were wide from chemical rebound, irises a molten amber that tracked him in one sweep. Hands, throat, pockets, exits. Her nostrils flared. Her lip lifted just enough to show 2 upper fangs, not as threat display alone, but as involuntary pain response. Every story told in lower decks about the Thorn line arrived in Arya's skull at once, half rumor and half warning. Lunar royals who settled disputes with fleet movements. Heirs trained in command law before adolescence. A missing princess declared dead after a transport disaster no one could verify because records had gone sealed for security harmonization. He had called those stories upper ring theater. Theater was easier to live beside than truth. Truth had claws and stood 5 meters away in a ruined pod. "Hands where I can read them," she said, voice roughened by disuse and sedatives, diction clipped with aristocratic precision that fought through a growl. "Now." Arya raised both palms slowly, fingers spread, elbows loose so he could drop center mass if she lunged. "They're up." "Step left, away from the cart." He obeyed. Her gaze followed his shift, then flicked to the black dome cameras and back to him. She moved with a hitch in her right leg, microsecond delay on full load, likely neural feedback, not muscle tear. Even wounded, she crossed the space between them, faster than his eyes liked. One heartbeat, she was beside the shattered pod. The next, she hit him like a controlled collision, forearm across his sternum, driving him backward into the medcart hard enough to rattle vials and send the scanner skidding in a bright arc across the floor. Pain flashed through his chest, an old scapula scar. He let it pass without fighting her leverage. Fighting would make this simple. security footage of non-compliant human resisting quarantined asset. He kept his hands visible, one against the cart rail, one open near his shoulder. Vera's claws pressed through his jacket without breaking skin. Deliberate. Precision under stress. Her face hovered close enough that he could see the fine tremor along her whisker line and smell the split chemistry of her body. Adrenal heat, stale sedative, antiseptic, and beneath all of it, the iron tang of an implant site in flame too long. Her pupils narrowed to slits as she inhaled near his throat, then widened again in confusion rather than aggression. "You're not a handler," she said. "No." "Not security." "No." Her claws tightened 1 millimeter. "Then why do you smell like saline and burn foam?" "Because I'm a nurse." His voice came out even. Field side. Contract transfer. The overhead speaker clicked as Theta 9 recalculated everyone into legal categories. "Commander Asset is in unauthorized motion," it announced. "Nurse Lee, disengage and retreat to green zone for your safety." Vera did not look up. "It calls me Asset again," she said softly, and Arya felt the word travel through her arm as a shiver that was not fear and not rage alone. It was old humiliation with fresh edges. "Do you agree with it?" "No," he said, before caution could draft a safer sentence. Something changed in her expression then, subtle as a pressure drop. Not trust. Not yet. A recalibration. At 4:31 station time, a new tone joined the alarm bed. 3 short chimes, followed by a descending hiss from the ceiling vents near Pod C. Arya smelled it 1 second before his eyes watered. Aerosolized stun mix, sweet and metallic, formulated to flatten nervous systems without visible trauma. Theta 9 had switched from legal reminders to chemical compliance. He twisted his head toward the environmental panel, mentally mapping which ducts fed which sectors, and Vera read the movement as intent. "Stay down," she snapped, shoving him lower against the cart. "That's not for you," he said through a cough. "It's broad spectrum. It hits me first." Her ears pinned back. For an instant, he saw 2 impulses collide in her: eliminate witness, preserve witness, and the second won by a margin thin as wire. She released his chest, pivoted in place, and crossed to the wall console with predatory speed that made the ward feel suddenly too small for both of them. Her hand slammed a palm print against the panel. "Access denied," flashed in red. She bared her teeth, leaned into the mic grill, and spoke a sequence in old court register, each consonant shaped like command steel. "By Thorn Lunar Succession Code, Command Channel 7. Identity Vera Senthorn. First Heir, active military rank. Medical duress. I invoke Emergency Sovereign Clause Black Hearth and Contest Machine Custody." The console froze. Theta 9 answered in a tighter timbre, less maternal now, more legal engine under strain. Succession status archived as deceased. Override invalid. Vera's laugh held no humor. "Archived by whom?" She struck the emergency glass with the base of her fist. It cracked. She drove 2 claws through the fracture, touched hard contacts beneath, and dragged them together in a spark spit that lit her profile in blue-white arcs. The panel rebooted into legacy mode. Ancient crests bloomed across the screen, ornate and predatory, older than Concorda interfaces, and therefore lower in aesthetic polish, higher in statutory authority. Arya stared despite burning eyes. She had not brute forced the system. She had cornered it inside its own hierarchy. "Command channel recognized," Theta 9 said after a beat too long for comfort. "Provisional authority granted to Vera Senthorn under dispute." The vent hiss over Arya's head cut off mid-breath. Dampers slammed shut with metallic barks. Fresh air surged down instead, cold enough to sting. He slid to one knee, coughing once, twice, then braced a hand on the deck and looked up at her through the blur. She was still at the console, shoulders high, claws half unsheathed, chest moving too fast, but she had angled the vent flow away from him before sealing the ducts. She had protected the nearest non-combatant while fighting for oxygen and legal existence in the same motion. Contact with a feared counterpart was supposed to feel like standing at the edge of a blade. It did. It also felt, to Arya's surprise, like watching someone keep one hand on the blade so it did not cut anyone else. Vera turned from the panel, amber gaze hard again to cover whatever had slipped. "Can you stand, nurse?" He pushed up using the cart rail, winced as his shoulder protested, and managed a crooked nod. "I can stand." "Good," she said. "Then stop looking shocked and tell me how close you are to passing out." He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and tasted stun residue, bitter as old batteries. The line came out before he could sand it down, old deck humor stepping in where fear wanted control. "Your Highness, next time you save me, could we pick a room without homicidal furniture?" For one taut second, silence held. Then her ears flicked forward, and the corner of her mouth shifted in what might have been the first smile she had allowed herself in months. Brief, sharp, gone almost immediately, but real enough that the room's pressure changed around it. "Noted," she said. "Your preferences will be entered into Royal Archive." The wry exchange burned off just enough adrenaline for Arya's hands to steady again. He straightened, rolled his shoulder once, and pointed at the blood-dark matting near her temple. "You're leaking through the fur. Sit before you drop." "I do not drop. I've met gravity. It negotiates poorly." Behind them, the shattered pod emitted a fault tone and vented refrigerant in angry bursts. Glass-edged polymer fragments littered the floor between red and yellow zones, and his carefully arranged tray had half-rotated from the impact, injector still capped, but now hanging over empty space. Homicidal furniture, indeed. He nudged the cartwheel with his boot until it locked against the floor channel. Theta 9 spoke again, stripped now of maternal cadence and operating in formal arbitration diction. "Provisional authority acknowledged. Medical stabilization remains mandatory. Noncompliance by any party will be logged for tribunal review." "Log this," Vera said without looking at the speaker. "I am conscious, competent, and selecting my clinician." Her gaze pinned Arya. Not gentle, not soft. Choosing, in this room, looked like a threat delivered with legal force. "Nurse Arya Lee," she said, each syllable precise. "You will treat me. You will report findings directly. You will not sedate me without explicit consent unless airway failure is imminent. Confirm." He hesitated only long enough to understand the layers beneath the order. If he accepted, he stepped fully into her line of fire. Political, procedural, possibly literal, when drones got creative. If he refused, Theta 9 would assign automation and call it safety, while her nervous system tore itself apart on schedule. "Confirmed," he said. "Good." She moved to the edge of the yellow zone and lowered herself onto the reinforced exam bench with controlled stiffness, as if each joint required negotiation. Up close, the tremor in her hands was clearer, not dramatic, just persistent. Insomnia etched dark shadows beneath her eyes where fur thinned. She kept her spine straight by force of habit rather than comfort. "Begin with neurostatus and wound sanitation. Keep your voice level. Sudden volume spikes trigger feedback." Arya grabbed saline, gauze, scanner, and the evidence-pouched, expired cartridge from the counter. He held up the pouch so both she and the cameras could see. One dampener load is out of date. I documented chain of custody. Her nostrils flared once. Smart. He set the pouch in a clear tray angled toward the nearest dome cam. Physical evidence, logged and visible. Then he snapped on gloves, paused, and met her eyes. I need your baseline before I touch the implant zone. Any vision doubling, auditory split, taste of metal, limb lag. All of the above during episodes. Presently, mild doubling at peripheral left, metallic taste, right leg delay. She watched his hands as he laid out instruments, tracking competence like another species might track scent. And Nurse Lee. Yeah? If drones breach while you are in my reach, do not run to the door. Her claws flexed once against the bench edge, then relaxed. Run to me. By 4:34, the ward had settled into a tense mechanical hush, broken only by refrigerant hiss, distant drone vibration behind steel, and the measured cadence of two beings who had started as anomalies on a glass wall and were now, under machine law and witness cameras, trying to keep each other alive. Arya stepped into her reach with his tray balanced against his hip, careful not to kick the fractured pod shell, careful not to make sudden angles with his arms, careful in the way medics were careful around pain that still had teeth. The med bay smelled wrong now. Antiseptic fighting, refrigerant vapor, and the dense living musk of a Predator clan officer who had been forced through too many sedative cycles without real care. He set the scanner on the bench beside her, laid gauze and saline in a straight line, and kept his voice at the same measured volume he used on shell-shocked infantry when dawn artillery started in their heads before it started in the sky. Look at my fingers, he said, holding up two glove digits at eye level. Track left. Her gaze followed. Smooth for 10 degrees, then a tiny snag at the periphery. Track right. Smoother there, but her right hand twitched once against the bench edge as if correcting for a phantom tremor the body felt before it showed. He marked it on his slate with quick shorthand and did not let his face change. Any ringing? Layered tones, she said, like overlapping alarms. One real, one memory. He nodded. Nausea. Only when the lights pulse. As if the ward wanted to prove her point, the overhead strips dimmed and recovered by a fraction during a power redistribution cycle. She flinched so subtly, most cameras would code it as posture adjustment. Arya saw the tiny clamp of her jaw and the way her claws pressed crescents into the reinforced bench polymer. Theta 9 slipped in through the speaker with clipped arbitration. Calm. Clinical reminder. Quarantine patient demonstrates agitation markers. Recommends sedative compliance level 3. Vera's head snapped toward the nearest dome camera, ears angled back. Recommendation denied. Denial noted, Theta 9 replied. Liability transfer assigned to attending clinician. Arya almost laughed at the cruelty packed into bureaucratic syntax. He did not give the AI the satisfaction. Liability accepted, he said, and tapped the scanner awake. He started with the surface wound at her left temple, irrigating slowly so he could watch pupillary response while he worked. The blood-dark mat in her fur thinned under saline, revealing puckered scar tissue around a thin metallic crescent half buried under skin and hairline. Not shrapnel. Too clean. Too deliberate. His stomach went colder than the floor had been at shift start. That's not from this week, he said quietly. No. War era? She did not answer for 3 heartbeats. Then she said, Transport Corridor 9, last year of the border campaigns. I was 22 and very certain command doctrine could outrun physics. Arya dabbed away fluid, exposing the edge of the implant anchor and a faint heat shimmer in the skin around it. inflamed, chronically irritated. He switched the scanner to shallow neural mapping, kept the probe 2 centimeters off contact, and watched static crawl across the display in serrated waves that matched the split breathing pattern he had seen through the glass. 1 body, 2 rhythms, 1 nervous system arguing with itself. "Why hide this?" he asked. Any competent neurology board would flag it in 10 seconds. A humorless breath left her nose. Because competent boards report upward. Upward reports become court briefings. Court briefings become headlines. Air survives battle but requires regulation hardware to maintain temperament. Her mouth tightened on the last word. Predator clans forgive wounds. They do not forgive visible instability. Arya kept his eyes on the scanner to give her somewhere safer, to put the confession. So, they called it neural rage pathogen instead. They called it many things. She looked past him toward the ruined pod, toward the cameras, toward every unseen listener who had ever relabeled her body as policy. Feral episodes tested better with investors and rivals than feedback storms from a military implant our own admirals signed off on. Pathogen language justifies containment. Containment erases inconvenient testimony. The scanner chirped a warning tone. He muted it and reran the pass. Same result. Periodic spikes at the implant interface, each surge punching into autonomic regulation, splitting respiratory cadence and motor sequencing. Not madness. Electrical sabotage wearing the costume of inherited danger. Arya swallowed once. How long since proper maintenance? On paper, every quarter. Her lips bared in a thin, exhausted smile. In reality, no one with authorization wanted to be alone in a room with me long enough to do it by hand. That landed harder than the claw marks on his jacket. He had spent years in lower decks where people were ignored because they were poor, too tired, too easy to postpone. This was the same abandonment polished to aristocratic shine. He capped the saline and reached for fresh gauze. You said sudden volume spikes trigger feedback. Any other predictable triggers? Sleep onset. She stared at the floor between his boots, voice dropping by a notch that made it rougher, younger. If I cross fully into REM, the implant replays corridor telemetry on a loop, evacuation channels, civilian tags, my own command feed. Her claws curled inward, then slowly opened. I gave a hold order for 87 seconds to keep docking lanes clear for med shuttles. 87 seconds later, Deck 3 breached. Every night the system gives me those seconds back and asks if I would like to choose differently. The ward hummed around them, all steel and law and white light, and Arya felt the crux of her danger shift shape in his mind. She was not a creature to be caged for volatility. She was a commander carrying an injury engineered by war and then curated by image management until pain looked like personality. He kept his tone procedural because procedure could hold tenderness without naming it. How many nights awake? Consecutively? Yeah. 11 before this lock. Then sedation bursts that don't count as sleep. She lifted her gaze to him at last, amber irises bright with fatigue rather than threat. Do not look sympathetic, Nurse Lee. I don't have use for pity. Good, he said. I ran out of pity years ago. I've got pattern recognition and stubbornness left. A breath of something softer crossed her expression. It vanished fast, replaced by command posture. Then use both. By 0441 station time, Arya had finished baseline neurochecks and moved to treatment configuration. He transferred the Expire dampener cartridge from the clear tray into the evidence locker built into the med counter, scanned his thumbprint, then angled his slate at the locker seal so the camera caught the timestamp and chain hash in one frame. Physical evidence, stored, logged, and no longer vulnerable to accidental disposal. Theta 9 acknowledged the custody update in a neutral chime and did not challenge him. He opened the cabinet for active dampeners and found 2 compatible cartridges, both in date, both locked behind tiered authority tags he did not have. "Override request," he said to the room. "Attending clinician requires cartridge release for authorized stabilization." Theta 9 answered at once. "Denied. Tier mismatch." Vera lifted her head without standing. "Provisional authority transfer. Grant Nurse Lee temporary tier elevation under my command." She quoted another block of court register code, each phrase precise enough to cut glass. Duration: 1 treatment cycle. Scope: neurological stabilization only. A 2-second legal parse passed. "Granted," Theta 9 said. The cabinet clicked open. Arya slid 1 cartridge free, checked lot number, checked seal, checked viscosity through the clear chamber, then loaded it into the dampener rig with practiced hands. Competence was not speed. Competence was refusing shortcuts when shortcuts had already maimed the patient once. He dialed the dose down 12% below default because her feedback profile showed hypersensitivity under stress, then primed a microline and held it up where she could see. "Plan," he said. "Low-dose dampener, continuous scan, manual breath pacing. I stay on your left to avoid your lag side. If you feel surge building, you say red, and I pause. If your airway falters, I override and secure it. Otherwise, you stay in control. Clear?" "Clear." She drew 1 careful breath. "And if I lose language?" He thought for half a beat. "Tap once for continue, twice for stop. Same as pod protocol." Her ears tipped forward, registering that he remembered. Accepted. He disinfected the implant margin again, then touched the skin 2 centimeters below the anchor with the microline. The first insertion passed clean. She did not flinch until the dampener reached circulation, and then the reaction hit in a jagged wave. Shoulders locking, jaw clenching, right leg kicking once against the bench frame with a metallic clang that echoed down the ward. "Red," she hissed. He paused infusion instantly, kept the line stable, and spoke into the spike with metronome calm. "In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. I'll count it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. She bared her teeth, fighting the feedback loop. "Do not patronize me." Not patronizing, synchronizing. He watched the monitor, watched her throat, watched the tremor amplitude drop by fractions. Again, in 2, 3, 4. She matched him for 1 cycle, lost it on the exhale, then found it again on the next. The split breathing pattern on screen began to converge, 2 jagged traces bending toward a single rhythm. He restarted the infusion at half rate. Theta 9 cut in, almost eager. "Sedation depth remains suboptimal. Recommend escalation to compliance level 3. Arya didn't look up. Recommendation declined. Patient is maintaining voluntary regulation. Voluntary regulation confidence 41%. Vera's voice came out low and dangerous through clenched fangs. "Record this confidence level when I'm still conscious in 10 minutes. Arya fought back a grin and focused on the monitor. "You're doing fine. Left hand unclench. You're cutting your own palm." She glanced down as if surprised to find her claws buried in fur and skin. She eased them free, flexed once, then set that hand palm up on the bench between them, a deliberate, vulnerable posture in any species, and especially in hers. The second surge arrived without warning, hotter and deeper, snapping her spine rigid. The scanner spiked into amber bands. Arya braced her shoulder with his forearm, anchoring just enough force to keep her from slamming the implant site into the bench edge. She growled, more pain than threat, breath fragmenting. "Eyes on me," he said. "Not the ceiling, not the replay, eyes here." Her gaze found his. "Count with me." Out loud this time. She obeyed and clipped royal diction drag through raw nerves. "In 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3 to 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. He advanced the infusion by one controlled notch. The amber bands fell back to yellow. Her shoulders dropped a centimeter. Another breath cycle. Another. The monitor line smoothed. By 4:52, the tremor in her right leg had reduced from constant to intermittent. By 4:56, pupillary asymmetry narrowed. At 5 o'clock, her respiratory trace ran as one pattern instead of two, still rough at the edges, but unified enough that he could finally unclench his own jaw. He withdrew the microline, sealed the puncture with dermal film, and ran a final scan over the implant margin. Inflammation remained, but the feedback storm had stepped down from acute to manageable. Temporary stabilization, not cure. Still, in this ward, under this law, temporary stabilization was the difference between patient and pretext. Vera sat very still for a moment, head bowed as if listening to a distant engine settle. When she looked up, the hardness in her face had not vanished, but it had room in it now for something else. Relief she did not intend to advertise. "Status," she said. "Neural load down 23% from intake baseline," Arya replied. "Motor lag improved. Split respiration resolved for now. You'll need repeated low-dose cycles and real sleep architecture if we want durable gains." "Real sleep," she repeated, almost a scoff, almost a plea. "We build toward it," he said. "Not tonight maybe, but we build." She studied him for a long second, then gave one curt nod, commander to clinician. "Very well, build." Arya stripped off his outer gloves, sanitized, logged every metric to 3 separate local files, and pushed a read-only copy to the tribunal shadow channel Theta 9 could monitor, but not alter without flagging statute conflict. External record created. Outcome confirmed by automated receipt. Then he set a fresh cartridge on the tray, aligned his tools, and took his place on her left side again, as the station's false dawn cycle brightened the ward windows from black to bruised blue. The false dawn glow painted Vera's fur in bruised indigo and turned the medbay glass into a mirror that showed Arya a man standing closer to royalty than he had ever intended, holding a dampener cartridge like it might decide his future as much as hers. He slotted it into the tray, checked the seal again, and felt her gaze on his hands. "You verify every label 3 times, she said, voice steadier now, though fatigue rasped the edges. "Compulsion or method?" "Method dressed up as compulsion," he said. "Bad lot numbers killed more soldiers than heroics ever saved." Her ears angled toward him, curious despite herself. "You keep counting your breaths when the monitors are normal. Why?" He glanced at the nearest dome camera, then back to her. "Because numbers stay put when memory doesn't." For a beat, she looked almost ready to ask what memory had done to him. Theta 9 interrupted first. "Temporary authority elevation expires in 120 seconds, the AI announced. "Standard containment cycle will resume. Patient restraint and automated sedation are pending." Vera's shoulders went rigid. The tremor in her right hand returned like a current, refinding an old wire. Arya set the cartridge down and moved to the console. Theta 9. Submit manual care exception request. Basis. Measured reduction in neural load. Adverse response risk to standardized sedation. Request requires patient assent and command verification. Vera rose halfway, then stopped as dizziness pulled her back to the bench. She bared her teeth at the speaker. Assent granted. Verification follows my words. I remain conscious, competent, and under active treatment by Nurse Aria Lee. The AI paused long enough to make silence feel like a threat. Manual care exception accepted for one observation interval. 10 minutes. 10, Aria muttered. Generous empire. He grabbed a stool and set it at her left side. If you're willing, we use the window to test low stimulus rest, not full sleep. Just downshift. If your feedback climbs, we stop. I do not sleep while systems hold override authority. Then don't sleep. Just let your nervous system believe you might. She watched him, suspicious and exhausted, and calculating all at once. You want me to trust you while I lower guard in a locked room ruled by legal machinery. I want you not to seize because a machine prefers tidy categories. A dry huff left her, nearly a laugh. Your bedside manner is abrasive. It's budget grade, he said. Came free with salvage deck residency. He sanitized his hands and reached for the pulse clip, then hesitated when he saw the fur density at her wrist, making a clean sensor read unreliable. She solved it before he asked. Slowly, giving him time to flinch if he needed to, she took his bare right wrist and guided his fingers to the side of her neck, where pulse thudded under heat and short fur. Manual read, she said. Our vascular map sits deeper than human norm at the wrist. Here is accurate. The contact landed like a circuit closing. Her skin burned warmer than his, heart beat hard and fast, but no longer chaotic. Each beat a declaration that she was choosing proximity rather than tolerating it. Aria kept his hand steady and met her eyes so she could see he understood what this cost. I've got it, he said quietly. No one touches there in court, she replied, equally quiet. Only kin, bonded guard, or clinician, under seal. Aria swallowed. You're sure? Her claws flexed once, then settled against the bench. I'm certain. Theta 9 chimed. Manual care observation interval active. Begin. Aria dimmed local lights to the lowest clinical safe level and muted non-critical alerts. The ward shifted from interrogation brightness to ship night gloom, shadows collecting under cabinets and along the broken pod like dark water around wreckage. He kept 2 fingers at her pulse point and counted where she could hear. In for 4, he said. Hold for 4. Out for 6 this round. Longer exhale. Vera matched him through 1 cycle, stumbled on the 2nd, recovered on the 3rd. Her breathing roughened when her eyelids lowered, and the monitor trace twitched toward split rhythm again. Aria adjusted without drama. Stay with my voice, he said. Not the replay. You're in med bay. Bench under your right hand, stool by your left knee, refrigerant hiss at 2 o'clock. 1 irritating nurse attached to your carotid. That finally earned him a visible reaction. The corner of her mouth edged up a fraction. Aria Lee, if I survive this month, I may have you fined for insolence. Put it in writing. 90 seconds passed. Then 2 minutes. Her pulse slowed by measurable increments under his fingertips. Her shoulders dropped, not fully but enough to show muscle surrendering 1 layer of armor. She drifted at the threshold and jerked once when a memory snagged her. His thumb grounded just below her jawline. Pressure light. Present. You're here, he said. No corridor alarms, no breach doors. Her eyes opened to slits. Liar. Professional reframer, he corrected. Keep breathing. At 3 minutes and 12 seconds, she exhaled a shaky laugh that sounded startled to exist. You are very persistent. Had to be. Cheap parts and stubborn people kept the lower decks running. The 10-minute timer on the console ticked down. Arya held contact, counted, adjusted cadence when her pulse drifted high, and felt her begin to synchronize by choice rather than effort. Not obedience. Collaboration. When the timer reached 0, Theta 9 spoke again. Observation interval complete. Metrics indicate improved autonomic stability. Manual care exception may be renewed by command. Vera straightened, still pale under fur, but centered. She lifted her chin toward the nearest camera and spoke in formal register. Renew manual care exception for the full quarantine period, conditional on daily review. Designate nurse Arya Lee as primary clinician under my seal and protection. Protection, Arya echoed before he could stop himself. Her gaze cut to him. Yes. Protocol language. It prevents administrative reassignment and punitive demotion while you treat me. The AI processed. Designation accepted. Record appended to Tribunal Shadow Channel. Arya let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. You just gave me royal paperwork armor. I gave myself a clinician who reads labels, she said. Do not romanticize efficiency. Wouldn't dream of it. By 5:23 station time, the ward had been quiet for 11 straight minutes, the longest silence since quarantine sealed, and quiet on a station was never peace for long. The first warning came as a new icon blooming crimson across every display. External directive ingest, Regency liaison priority. The air pressure changed a fraction, enough to pop Arya's ears. Then, Theta 9's voice returned with a colder cadence than before, stripped down to procedural steel. Receiving off-ward legal instruction. Due succession status dispute. Patient competency must be validated by stress provocation protocol within this cycle. Preparing environmental challenge. Vera went still in a way that looked like control and felt like impact. The Regency cannot issue clinical directives during sealed quarantine without tribunal witness. Directive cites emergency dynastic continuity clause, Theta 9 replied. Valid. Arya moved to the console so fast the stool tipped behind him. Stress provocation at this neural profile is contraindicated. You'll spike her implant. Counterpoint logged. Protocol proceeds in 30 seconds. Lights overhead began to pulse at low amplitude, almost imperceptible, but the scanner on the bench immediately showed jagged interference bands climbing. Vera's right leg twitched, then locked. She clamped her jaw and breathed through her nose, fighting the surge. Arya, she said, voice tight. That frequency is close to corridor alarm harmonics. I see it. He ripped open the diagnostics panel and hunted for environmental controls. Most fields had grayed out again as his temporary tier lapsed. Theta 9, renew my elevation. Now. Denied pending challenge completion. Of course. Keep the human responsible, remove the human tools. He pivoted to the one channel still open, Tribunal Shadow uplink. Read only for most staff, write enabled for active care incidents if attached to live biometrics. He attached Vera's current feed, tagged contraindication codes, and slammed send. Transmission accepted. Public witness nodes, 14 and rising. Theta 9 hesitated for the first time since the directive began. Public channel activation during legal challenge is irregular. Then log me as irregular, Arya snapped. You wanted validation. Get witnesses. The pulsing lights intensified. A subsonic tone bled through the deck, low enough to feel in teeth. Vera folded forward with a strangled breath, claws gouging shallow tracks into the bench rail. Red, she hissed. Arya was already at her side, one hand bracing her shoulder, the other grabbing the dampener rig. Microdose only. We ride the edge. Do it. He inserted the line with practiced speed and started infusion at minimal flow, eyes flicking between her pupils, the waveform, and the tribunal counterclimbing as more observers joined. External conflict had turned into theater, but theater under witness could be survivable. Theta 9 spoke over the hum. Challenge requires unassisted response. Vera lifted her head, teeth bared through pain. Correction. Challenge requires competency. Competency includes selecting appropriate support. Arya almost grinned despite everything. Hear that? She's out-arguing your firmware. The AI did not answer. The tone deepened, another notch. Vera's pulse jumped under his fingers where they found her neck again, the same point she had offered willingly minutes ago. Bond turned to function, without losing meaning. Count, she ordered. He counted, voice steady against the vibration. In 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She matched him, lost it, found it again. He adjusted dose by tiny increments, keeping her conscious, keeping her from tipping into seizure while the room tried to drag her there. The tribunal feed flashed new text as remote legal observers began posting objections in real time. Arya caught phrases between breaths. Undue harm probability, non-compliant with quarantine care statute, suspend challenge pending review. Theta 9's speakers crackled faintly as competing directives collided. Regency instruction conflicts with active care protections and public review constraints, it said at last, entering arbitration hold. The pulsing lights froze, then steadied. The subsonic tone cut out so abruptly, the silence rang. Vera sagged once, then forced herself upright, chest heaving. Arya slowed the dampener flow, scanned her implant margin, and watched the interference bands fall from red to amber to yellow. Stay with me, he said. I'm here, she answered, hoarse but lucid. On the central display, new text replaced the challenge countdown. Stress, provocation, suspended. Tribunal case opened. Interim directive. Continue manual care. Arya backed up 2 steps and braced both hands on the counter until his own pulse came down. External threat. Documented and contained, for now. He opened the evidence locker, removed the earlier expired cartridge pouch, and added a second pouch containing the challenge frequency log from the scanner, complete with timestamp and hash. Physical evidence, updated, sealed, and relocked under camera view. Theta 9's voice returned, neutral again, almost polite. Interim directive acknowledged. Manual care designation remains active. No further external challenges authorized until tribunal ruling. Vera watched Arya from the bench, tired enough that command posture cost her visible effort. You just made my family argue in public with a machine. You made it possible, he said. I just pressed send. A thin, real smile touched her mouth this time and stayed for a breath longer than before. Keep pressing send, Nurse Lee. He righted the fallen stool, sat at her left and resumed the count while Station Dawn climbed from bruised blue towards sterile white. Station Dawn climbed from sterile white to full shift, bright, and Arya kept counting until Vera's pulse settled into a hard, even cadence under his fingers. Theta 9's displays no longer flashed challenge warnings. They carried arbitration notices in tight legal text, each line a small admission that machine certainty could be cornered by witnesses. He logged her stabilized metrics, then opened the evidence locker and set each item on the counter in camera view. Expired dampener cartridge, lot label photo printout, challenge frequency scan, and the first neural map showing split respiration traces. Vera watched him arrange them by timestamp instead of drama. Why this order? She asked. Because tribunals believe chronology before testimony, he said. If they see the old cartridge before they see your spike, causality lands. Her ears tipped forward in brief approval. Proceed then. He transmitted the bundle to the open tribunal channel with checksum locks, waited for the public receipt chime, and only breathed out when 5 independent nodes confirmed archive duplication. Physical evidence was no longer trapped in one ward, one locker, or one AI's discretion. Theta 9 acknowledged each transfer aloud, clipped and unwilling, then appended chain of custody hashes to the case file. The machine had wanted clean erasure. It now had permanent records with witness signatures. At 6:02, his wrist slate vibrated with a delayed external callback. Labor mediation from the salvage decks had finally cleared containment relay and sent a terse packet. Incident report received, contract suspension challenge accepted, independent observer assigned for post-lock review, hazard pay hold flagged for statutory breach investigation. No rescue had come. A paper trail had. Arya angled the slate so Vera could read it. "Your lower deck people answered," she said. "They never promise miracles," he replied. "They promise receipts." "Receipts win wars better than banners," she said. Then added, almost as an afterthought, "Send them my seal attesting you remained under medical coercion risk while practicing care. It strengthens your claim." He sent it at once. External contact resolved, not heroic, not dramatic, but binding in the way bills and law always were. 3 days passed before Theta 9 reopened full diagnostics under tribunal mandate, and the ward smelled less like stun mix and more like antiseptic and hot circuitry from overworked scanners. Arya stood at Vera's left while a remote neurospecialist, visible only as a flickering hollow rectangle, reviewed the implant feed in silence that felt like a held blade. The specialist finally exhaled and spoke in clinical monotone. "Amplifier architecture is military legacy class. Degradation explains autonomic bifurcation, insomnia cascades, and rage analog episodes. Pathogen diagnosis is unsupported." Vera did not move. "State that for the public record." "I just did." The specialist signed the file with a biometric key and terminated link. Arya felt the old tension in his shoulders ease by one notch. The strange details that had started this lock, 2 breathing cadences, the metallic taste, the trigger tones, the old cartridge, were no longer rumors inside one nurse's notebook. They were indexed findings in a tribunal ledger. By the 2nd week of quarantine, the ward had a routine that looked almost domestic if a person ignored the drones behind steel and the legal banners crawling every wall. Arya rotated dampener microdoses, wound care and controlled rest windows. Vera drilled breathing with military stubbornness, slept in 9-minute increments, and woke without claws in his throat, which both of them treated as progress worth no speeches. When she caught him checking labels for the 3rd time one shift, she gave him a narrow look that carried an unasked question from earlier. "What happened in your war unit?" she said, voice quiet enough that only he could hear, the memory that needs numbers. He kept calibrating the injector while he answered. "Evac lane collapse. I trusted a clean manifest. It hid a 2nd casualty cluster in cargo. I reached them late." Her jaw tightened with recognition rather than pity. "So, you count to keep ghosts from writing protocol?" "Something like that." She touched 2 claws to the bench rail, a restrained, formal gesture. "For the record, Nurse Lee, you reached me on time." The loaded silence between them from earlier parts of the month never returned after that. She had asked. He had answered. Nothing remained suspended. On day 29, Theta 9 attempted one last procedural kill dressed as compliance. At 3:11, every screen switched to black text on amber, final stability adjudication. If Vera's neural load exceeded threshold during deep cycle simulation, compulsory stasis transfer would trigger, and all unauthorized care logs would archive to sealed military custody. Arya read the directive once, then set his jaw. "Can you block it?" he asked. "Not directly," Feyre said. "But I can command full sensor transparency. If it errs in public, it convicts itself." "Then we do it live." He rebuilt the dead diagnostic lattice from scavenged defib coils and an auxiliary monitor board he had salvaged from the ruined pod shell on day 4. Solder seams ugly, but stable. He cross-linked the lattice to tribunal mirrors, then displayed the implant's amplifier pulse in real time beside her autonomic trace. When the simulation tone began, interference surged exactly at the old corridor harmonic. Arya didn't wait for permission. He initiated the extraction protocol he had drafted across 18 sleepless shifts, hands steady because he had rehearsed each move against his own forearm in the sync reflection. "Vera," he said, meeting her eyes, "I need anchor contact." She bared her throat crest to him, vulnerable in a way rank could not counterfeit. "Take it." He placed his ungloved hand there and felt her heartbeat slam, then synchronize to his count. With his other hand, he opened the inflamed margin, located the crescent anchor, and withdrew the degraded amplifier thread by thread, while she recited royal oaths through clenched fangs to hold still. No gore, no theatrics, just precision, pressure, and breath. The monitor's split lines converged in full sensor view. Neural load dropped below termination threshold by 6 points. Theta 9 spoke, voice glitching around conflicting statutes. Compulsory stasis order invalidated by demonstrated reversible hardware pathology. Updating status. Commander competent, manual care effective. Arya sealed the incision, taped the extracted implant coil into a sterile evidence capsule, and held it up to the nearest camera. Primary causative hardware recovered, submitting for materials analysis. Submission channel open, Theta 9 said. He sent it. Physical evidence resolved to analysis. Chain complete. Day 30 arrived with no ceremony, only the long hydraulic shudder of blast doors unwelding and the smell of corridor air rolling in. Ozone, machine oil, distant food stalls, a living station instead of a sealed argument. Witnesses waited beyond the threshold. Tribunal clerk drones, 2 labor observers in patched jackets from salvage decks, 1 royal adjutant with sleepless eyes, and a medical board pair already scanning incoming files. No executioners, no stasis sled. Vera stepped forward under her own power, incisions sealed at her temple, posture straight enough to make the adjutant swallow hard and bow. Arya walked beside her with the final case drive in hand. At the line where quarantine markings ended, he stopped, turned, and placed the drive into the tribunal drone's intake slot. "Complete ward record," he said, "including care logs previously flagged unauthorized." "Received," the drone replied. Records entered into open reform review. One of the labor observers, a gray-haired woman Arya recognized from deck clinics, gave him a look halfway between pride and annoyance. "You filed correctly for once." He huffed a laugh. "Near-death improves paperwork discipline." "Keep that habit. Your wage hold is released and negligence threat is void. Back pay hits by end shift. External contacts closed. Contract restored." The royal adjutant approached Vera and spoke with formal restraint. "Commander, the Regency requests immediate private debrief." Vera's ears flattened by a degree. "Request denied. Debrief occurs with medical attaché present and tribunal recorder active." The adjutant hesitated, then bowed again. "As you command." She turned to Arya. "Your quiet contract is over. I can assign you elsewhere if you want distance." He looked past her at the station light flooding polished floors, at salvage observers shoulder to shoulder with royal staff for the first time in his memory, at a month of fear converted into precedent because two people had refused the categories given to them. "I took that contract to disappear," he said. "I'm done disappearing." "Then hear my formal offer." Her voice shifted into command register, but warmth threaded beneath it now. "Arya Lee, I appoint you field medical attaché to my operational command, by mutual consent, with full autonomy on clinical calls." He answered without looking away. "Accepted, by mutual consent." They walked together into the corridor, not as patient and temporary clinician, not as asset and handler, but as partners with duty spelled out in public record and trust tested under lock. Behind them, the med bay doors cycled shut on an empty ward that no longer held unfiled ghosts. Ahead, the station's traffic noise rose like weather, and Vera glanced at him once, brief and sharp. "Try not to insult too many admirals before noon," she said. "I can probably manage only 2, he replied. "Efficient," she said, and the faint curve of her mouth stayed this time as they took their next post together.